What if the jungle kept perfect count of every breath you took, and when it reached a number only it understood, something stepped out to claim the next one? What if a path you swore was behind you began appearing in front of you, and every tree looked like a witness that refused to blink? Some stories are too strange to be true, but what if they're only pretending to be fiction, so you will listen with your guard down? Welcome back to my channel, Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I have something truly haunting for you. We are going deep into the green where the air tastes like wet stone, where drums can echo without a drummer, and where a voice you know might call you by a name you have never told anyone. From eerie signals in the canopy to trails that move when no one is watching. Each story is a mystery waiting to unfold. Secrets here do not stay buried. They learn the shape of your footsteps and follow. As you listen, tell me which story crept under your skin the most in the comments. If you have ever felt the forest listening, you already know why some doors must stay closed. Are you ready to open them anyway? Story 1. The drums under the canopy. The jungle started drumming with my heartbeat long before I heard the drums, and that is how I know it chose me first. By the time I reached our second campsite, the air was heavy enough to drink. Everything sweated. Leaves sweated. The soil sweated. The canvas sweated. Mosquitoes stitched the evening closed with a sound like distant static. The smell was wet bark and something metallic hiding behind the rain. If you have ever felt a forest watching you, you know that sense of being counted, of being tallied and weighed. I told myself it was the humidity, but the trees swayed without wind, as if nodding to a rhythm I could not place. I'm a field researcher with a problem. I make a living testing old stories until they break. The donors who bought our permits expected photographs of normal animals, not folk spirits. Mateo, my friend and fixer, kept telling me not to mock the things I did not understand. We had 2 weeks to finish the route, 3 if we rationed, and a reputation I did not want to lose. If I turned back, I would be the man who blinked at a campfire tale, and that kind of blink follows you forever. The first sign felt like a joke. A face carved into a tree, 2 eyes and a long mouth. No marks from a blade, as if the bark itself had grown into a mask. It looked vaguely like me, which is the sort of thought you lock away if you want to sleep. My compass needle spun in lazy circles, then froze, pointing north no matter how I turned. When the warm rain started, it smelled like iron. Not blood exactly, more like a coin pressed to the tongue. And beneath the rain was a faint second rhythm, a gentle drumming that I told myself was drops hitting leaves. You would have laughed with me that first night. The drums were so far away, they could have been imagination. Mateo said there was a village days from here that they sometimes beat the skins for ceremonies, and I wanted to believe him. I really did. But sometime after midnight, something tapped my tent pole once like a knuckle asking to be let in. I sat up with my recorder in my hand and asked who was there. The only answer was the way the frogs paused, as if the entire forest held its breath with me. The next morning we tried to move faster. Our plan was simple. Make the ridge by noon. Sight the river bend by dusk. If we kept to the math, the jungle could not trick us. That was the theory. In practice, the landmarks shifted. The same strangled fig appeared on our left twice, then once on our right. Our blazes were there and not there. I kept smelling that iron sweetness before we lost our bearings, like a bell warning of a turn no map showed. When we stopped for water, I looked back and could not see our own footprints. Around mid-afternoon, I heard my name. Quiet. Familiar. Not Mateo's voice, but close enough to make me turn. It came from just off the trail, in a pocket of shadow where the light felt colder. I could almost swear I saw someone step behind a stand of palms, someone wearing a dark shirt like Mateo's. I called out, and the answer was a soft drum pattern, 12 beats, a pause, 12 more. The number mattered, but not yet to me. I told Mateo there had to be a village. He shook his head. His eyes said another thing entirely. We found a clearing at dusk and set the fly low. That is when I saw the carved face again, a different tree this time, the same stretched mouth. Sap wept from the eyes like amber tears. I pressed my palm to the bark. It was warm. The impression of cheekbones felt too human, too precise. If you were rolling your eyes, I get it. I thought some prankster was ahead of us. Maybe they were guarding sacred ground. Maybe they were warning us off with masks and drums. That was comforting compared to the other possibility. The drums came closer. There's a pattern your body recognizes before your mind does. And when the rhythm finds it, it lodges in the ribs. 12 beats, a pause, 12 beats. A count. I remembered a guide from years ago who joked that if the jungle ever reached 13 before dawn, you were not meant to leave. It was a joke, right up until the sound seemed to come from the canopy itself, from the woven green above us, like the sky was drumming with hollow hands. I lay awake, timing the pauses, waiting for them to slip. Just before midnight, Mateo went to the stream with his headlamp to fill the bottles. He left me the radio and the machete. I told him not to go far. He said not to worry. The drums were softer then, as if the forest were listening for our footfalls instead of making its own noise. 10 minutes passed. 15. When I called, the radio answered in a voice made of insects. I told myself to wait. People step off trails at night, and it is how they vanish, one impatient stride at a time. Then something heavy moved through the brush just beyond the light. I did not bring the machete. I brought the recorder like a shield. At the stream, the world became all reflections, stars shaking in black water. The moon twisted across pebbles. There were footprints leading down and none coming back. Mateo's canteen lay in the ferns as if set there with care. I called his name, and the echo returned wrong, like a mouth full of leaves repeating a word for the first time. The iron smell was stronger where the water slowed. I thought I saw a shape in the trees, a man wearing Mateo's lamp, but the beam shivered, then went dark. I did what you would do if you wanted to believe there was a simple answer. I followed the beam. I told myself any tribe living out here had rules we had broken, that the drums were a warning and not a lure. My boots found a path that did not exist in daylight, a thin ribbon of trampled green threading between the roots. The masked faces watched from trunks and from clusters of vines that looked like ribs. I felt small and strange, as if walking inside the throat of something enormous, and the air had the taste of pennies. When I returned to camp, there were two camps. Ours, with our packs and the little pyramid of empty tins next to the ashes, and another, 20 paces away, set in the same arrangement, with the same tins, the same slouch to a sleeping bag. The only difference was a film of black mold on the other tent and a journal on a stump that looked like mine, damp and curled, written in a hurried hand I almost recognized. The page that lay open read, "Do not answer if it calls your name." I closed the book and the drums skipped a beat. I shouted for Mateo then because whatever the rules were, I had already broken them. The radios were dead. The compass lay on the ground spinning. My GPS showed the same coordinates no matter where I stood. When I looked up, the canopy did a slow ring, like a mouth circling a word. The price began to show itself. Our extra food was gone. Our backup batteries were soaked in a pouch that should have been waterproof. My camera, the proof I promised the donors, blinked once and then never again. The jungle was taking pieces that narrowed my choices. There is a comfort in blaming people. It makes the world small enough to fight. I told myself there was a hidden tribe out here, protective of a site where they kept their dead. The masks were their work. The drums were a boundary. I even convinced myself the second camp was theirs, copied to unsettled trespassers. It held together until the moment I walked around the mold-dark tent and found no footprints. Not a single track led to that place. The ferns had grown through the guy lines. A spider web ran from rib to rib. Whoever built it never arrived. I ran my hand over the mass tree. The wood had grown into that face in rings, not in cuts. My rational brain went quiet. The drums did a new thing then. They answered my pulse. I pressed my fingers to my neck, and the rhythm matched the drum. 12 beats, a pause, 12 beats. Imagine listening to your heart from outside your body. Imagine something else listening with you. I checked my watch. The second hand ticked in time, then stuttered as if it were learning a different count. If it reached 13, what would it mean? The point of no return was not dramatic. It never is. It was a decision spoken to no one. I told the recorder I would follow the drums before dawn. I left a note under a tin in case a ranger found our camp. I took one bottle, a headlamp with a fading ring of light, and the knife I had always thought of as a tool. You can tell yourself you're only going to the first bend, the first cluster of palms, that you will listen and come back. But there are sounds that make a path as real as a road. The drummer revealed himself half a mile in, and I say himself only because the shape he wore was mine. He stood in a clearing with his back to me, shoulders hunched, head tilted like he was listening for a train. His hands were on a hollow log, the surface polished to a shine by years of invisible palms. Every time he struck, my chest thumped. My breath came when he paused. Around him, the carved faces were not carved. They were grown, paused mid-gesture by a force that asks trees to remember human expressions. He turned, and I saw the mask. It was the one from the first tree, but not wood anymore. It was skin. My skin. Imagine looking into your own living face without a person behind it. My first thought was a trick with paint. My second was that someone could have followed, studied my features, and made a copy. The red herring begged for attention because it was easier than the third thought, that the jungle liked to echo visitors until they forgot they had voices of their own. He tapped 12 beats and lifted a hand to invite 13. I said my own name to see which of us would answer. He did, with my voice, the way I sound when I'm trying to sound sure. He told me Mateo had found water and that I should rest. He told me we were close to the ridge, that the GPS was wrong, that the river bend was over the next rise. He sounded helpful, apologetic. There is nothing more dangerous than a kindness you do not need. Behind him, the palms trembled like lips. The smell of iron grew so strong I could taste it, and my teeth felt like keys. I stepped closer, and he stepped back the exact same measure. It was like watching a reflection hesitate. He raised a mask with his fingertips. Underneath, there was another mask, thinner, more exact. He let that one fall, and beneath it was a third. I did not think there was a face behind the last one. I think there was only space shaped like me. The drums came from the clearing, and also from the old growth above, and also from inside my chest. I realized then that the 13th beat was not a strike. It was a choice. I did not want to make the right one. I wanted to run for the ridge and pretend the trail was still a trail. Instead, I kept walking until my boots were touching his boots. I put my hand out and touched the mask that wore my cheekbones. The material was not bark. It was not skin. It was something halfway that pulsed at the edge of warmth, like the inside of the wrist. When I pressed, the drum stopped, and so did my pulse for a count I could not hold in the head. When it came back, the rhythm had learned a new number. Something moved in the trees, a huddle of shapes like people carrying instruments. I thought for one idiot moment that the tribe would step out and scold me for trespassing. I recognized the trick even as I wanted it to be true. The shapes were vines. They fell from the canopy in loops the size of arms and began to tap against the log as if practicing. Whatever the figure was, lowered his hand and waited for me to complete the count. My watch stopped. The second hand froze between marks. The moon slid behind a bloom of cloud. So I did the only thing left. I raised my palm and struck the hollow once. The sound went through my body and came back slower. I did it again, and the forest leaned in to listen. 12 beats, and I knew if I let my hand fall one more time, dawn would not arrive in a way I recognized. Somewhere, water moved over stones. Somewhere, a bird of the kind that sings only before rain made a single cry and went silent. I looked at the mask that had my face and saw condensation at the lip line, as if it were breathing. I said Mateo's name. The vines paused. The figure tilted its head like a dog hearing a whistle. It said Mateo in my voice, and something about the way it lingered on the second syllable told me it was not a recording. It was learning. That was when I understood why the iron smell followed the rain. Not because of blood, because the jungle tastes us through what we leave on leaves and tools and stones, and it learns our shape from that trace. When it knows you well enough, it makes a you that fits here better, a you that will stay. I stepped away from the drum. That was my rebellion, small and late. The figure did not follow. It only raised its hands slowly to finish the count. The vines held still. The mass watched. I took a breath and let the number fold back into my ribs. I spoke into the recorder, and said I would not be taken tonight. The clearing did not argue. It did not need to. The consequence came immediately. I could not find the path back. Every direction was the same soft slope into green, the same hung nets of light. The delayed echo waited until later. When I finally stumbled into a space that remembered being our camp, dawn had arranged itself like a promise. The second tent was gone, or maybe mine was. The tins were stacked into a neat little pyramid with a note beneath, just like the one I had left, only not in my handwriting. Do not answer if it calls your name. It said again, and then, this time you didn't. The radio sat on the stump and turned on without an argument. The compass pointed south. The smell of iron faded as the sun burned the dew into ghosts. I slept then, or I think I did. The body will take what it needs. When I woke, half of my field journal was written in a slant that looked like my own on a day when I am rushing. The entries described a safe ridge, a river bend that arrived on schedule, a long, easy walkout to a waiting truck. They were so careful. They included the names of birds I would have noticed, the way the light falls through vines, the joke Mateo tells to break tension. It all sounded like mercy. The last line said, "Let me do the talking." I packed with hands that did not feel like mine. I called for Mateo and heard the forest repeat me back with better posture. I decided to live with the unanswered for now. We walked out 3 days later by a route I do not remember choosing, my body following a path my mind refused to map. At the ranger station, a nurse took my vitals and frowned at my pulse, as if it were tapping a count she had never learned. She said I looked familiar. She asked if we had met. I told her no and hoped I was right. That night, in a clean bed that did not move with roots, I closed my eyes and the drums began again. 12, pause, 12. I counted with them because pretending you can stop a sound is how it stays. On the 13th, the silence in my room felt like a mouth opening. I thought of the mask and the condensation at the lip. I thought of the note in my own careful hand telling me I had chosen differently this time. I thought of the pages that promised a safe way home and how easy it would be to let that version speak for me. If you hear drums in the middle of your quiet night, do not answer the beat with your heart. Let the rhythm pass through you like water. Today I had 4 clients. Anya with the keen eyes and a camera wrapped in a plastic sleeve. Tyler with a drone he was not supposed to fly. Mr. and Mrs. Badia, married for 30 years and still arguing kindly over the names of birds. We were on a simple loop with a pickup at 6:45 p.m. if we met the Ranger Road. Pride and rent kept me smiling, even when the heat pressed hands to my back. I did not admit being lost. That is the flaw I feed quietly, like a pet that looks small until it eats your dinner. When we climbed out of the ravine, the trail ran forward and behind in the same set of boot marks. I joked the last tour had followed a perfect line and we were lucky to find it. The air smelled like damp soil and crushed leaves. The insects buzzed hard enough to sand thoughts down. Somewhere a bird should have called noon, but the sound did not come. The silence made my voice sound borrowed. We moved. The path was a narrow rib through the ferns, brown with long use. I keep time on a cheap field watch because phones lie under the canopy. I checked it and felt the first tick of hurry. The monsoon likes to sprint at dusk. We did not want to be inside the hammock of green when the sky broke. I told them stories as we went. People relax when you narrate the future. You say, we will reach the big K-Pock at 1, the stream at 2, the Ranger Road before dark. The forest nodded and said nothing, which felt like waiting. At 1, the K-Pock appeared, a giant trunk with buttress roots like stone sails. We took pictures. We tied a red strip of fabric to a root because tourists love leaving proof of arrival. As we circled to continue, Anya frowned at my feet. "Your shadow," she said. "It is wrong." I looked down. The sun sat slightly left. My shadow leaned right. I stepped, and the shadow hesitated, then caught up as if delayed by a thought. I laughed because that is what people buy. I said the canopy bends light strangely. I said trees play tricks. I did not look long. We left the kapok and 20 minutes later stood in front of it again. Red strip where we had tied it, our footprints circling like a snake biting its tail. No one spoke at first. Then Mr. Badia said, "Maybe there too." His wife shook her head because the strip was ours. The silence changed shape, the way a room changes when a door opens behind you. I showed them my map and traced the loop with a finger. I have guided this route for 6 seasons. I know the trick places. This was not one. My voice felt like a bridge with one board missing. A child's voice whispered, "Right at the hollow, left at the root, right again." There were no children with us. The whisper came from ahead, exactly where the trail narrowed, gentle and patient like a teacher. Anya looked at me. Tyler swallowed and lifted his drone case, then set it down because I had band flying here. "Mr. and Mrs." Badia held hands at a sink. I said it was a hunter's recording, a lure for animals, shallow speakers wired to trees. I said rival operators mess with groups for laughs, saying that made it almost true, which is the first mistake. By 2, the heat pulled a sheet over everything. We reached a stream, and I called a 10-minute break. I keep emergency water stashed on this loop, cached in a tree hollow near a rock like a bent knee. While I reached in, my fingers closed on plastic in relief, and when I tugged it free, the bottle crumpled with a flat sigh. The date on the label was today, printed from this morning's kiosk. Anya saw it and did not say anything at all. There were new scuffs on the bark like hands had been here, except the moss was unbroken. We ate dried fruit and promised the Ranger Road was not far. A damselfly landed on my wrist and ignored my pulse. Clouds drifted in from the east like slow bruises. The ticking element was not only my watch. It was the sky's face, preparing to break. We set off again. Up ahead, we saw people. 4 of them. The line of shoulders and hats, so familiar, my chest went light. Tyler squeezed my arm hard enough to bruise. "That is us," he said. The people ahead moved with our rhythm and then slipped around a bend, their footprints fresh and neat. I ran the math in my head. The pickup at 6:45. The Ranger who leaves at 7 sharp. For clients who would write reviews that lived online longer than I wanted to be remembered. Forward, I said, because I have always believed in forward. We followed our future selves along a stretch of trail that smelled briefly like rain on iron, and I filed that away as a warning I would understand later. When we rounded the bend, the path looked untraveled. No prints, no ferns, only a feeling like arriving late to something that had already ended. At 3, we cut right at a strangled fig, and at 3:20, the same strangled fig appeared, its roots wrapped around a boulder like knuckles. The voice returned, soft as breath. "Right at the hollow, left at the root." Tyler said into his throat mic that our radios were useless, and then laughed when he heard his own words repeat from the trees a heartbeat later. He tried again. "Useless," the forest agreed, a split second late. The delay was not echo. It was attention. Mrs. Badia asked very simply if she would get to sleep at home tonight. I said yes, because she deserved that lie. At our second cash point, our food was gone. In its place sat the same brand of bars, but swollen and sour with wet, packages milky at the edges with mold that should have taken days. Flies that were not there earlier combed the wrappers as if paid. I felt the group's trust tilt. I offered the good bars from my pack and made a joke about raccoons we do not have. The whisper in the trees said, "Left at the root," and then coughed like someone forgetting to speak. We heard voices ahead that sounded like us, arguing very politely about water. We came to a low hill and found a campsite laid out clean. Same number of hammocks. Same knot I teach for rainy nights. The tarp sagged on one corner because last season I had taught a team a shortcut that I regretted later. A notebook sat on a log, closed with a twig. It was not mine, but the scuff on the cover matched where I dropped mine last month on rocks near the same hill. I opened it and saw my handwriting from another day describing this exact clearing. On the last line I had written, "Do not follow your own voice. If you think this is where we ran, I wish I could agree. Panic is a luxury when you are paid to be calm." I took a breath that felt like borrowing someone else's lungs. I told the group that a rival tour must be copying my setup to lure us off route. It sounded thin in the wet air, but it gave them something to hate besides me. The red herring tasted like rope when you lick it to pull, bitter but familiar. Tyler wanted to fly the drone. I said no because I needed rules to be true somewhere. The forest watched me choose. We tried to hail the ranger at 4 for check-in. The radio hissed and then cleared, and for a second I heard my own voice saying we were making good time. That kind of thing will put a crack in you that doesn't show until you turn your head and the wrong thought falls out. Anya said her shadow was doing a different walk. She lifted her hand, and the shadow was half a second behind, like it had to think about the gesture. The sun was still left. Her shadow leaned right. The line between us and the ground felt like wet paper. At 4:30, the sky slipped a nail and thunder rolled in a long jaw. We had to decide, back to the ravine and admit we were looping, or forward toward the road that should cut the jungle like a seam. I voted forward because I am the kind of man paid to believe my own line. The immediate consequence was simple. The group obeyed. The delayed echo waited with patient teeth. If you have ever made a choice that feels like pulling glass from your heel, you know the relief is temporary. The glass remembers you when you sleep. We moved faster. The path narrowed to the width of a boot. The vines leaned down as if listening. I kept time in my head. An hour and changed to make the road before dark. The whispering map grew bolder. Right at the hollow, it said. The hollow was not there. Left at the root, it said. The root had not grown. I understood then that the voice was reciting the trail from a day we were not living. A child reading directions for a loop that someone else finished. A lure that sounded patient because it had never felt a deadline. At 5:15, we heard singing. The song was a counting rhyme in a language Tyler did not know he knew. He whispered the numbers without meaning to, his mouth moving like it belonged somewhere else. Ahead, in a shallow basin, we saw them again. Ourselves, for figures in the half-light, strapping hammocks, easing tired shoulders. My double's posture hurt to look at. He stood easy. He smiled at something Mrs. Badias said, like a man who never worries about the last hour of the day. I stepped forward and my double turned, calm as glass. There are versions of you that would sell your mother to get off a trail with your name intact. There are versions that would burn the map to find out what fire sounds like in the rain. The one ahead of me looked like the man I tell clients I am. He lifted a hand in greeting, and his shadow did not hesitate. It moved with him like a trained dog. Anya made a small sound. Her eyes were asking me to be the kind of guide whose shadow follows rules. The smell of oncoming rain slid through the ferns like a promise. "Hello," he said. Same voice, same stable tone. He introduced himself by my name and thanked the group for their trust. He said the ranger road was close, that he had radioed ahead. Their faces turned toward him like flowers towards sun. I said no, without meaning to. The word came out raw. He looked at me with kind concern the way you look at a man badly frightened by wind. He asked if I needed to sit down, as if the jungle had finally taken my nerves. Mr. Badia looked from me to him and back, the scale tipping. I walked toward my double and watched for the seam. I found it at his wrist. Guides collect small scars like coins. There's a scratch on my watch band from a canyon burr that bit me in June. His band shone new. No scratch. Yet the face of his watch carried the same thin crack from a drop on a granite lip last year. Mismatch. Shadow first, then watch, then the rhythm of his breathing just a hair late to the rain. The trail had built him from my outline and filled the rest with patience. He was almost enough. "Do not do this," I told him. I did not mean the conversation. I meant the taking. He smiled, and the whole jungle seemed to relax as if we had said the magic word. He asked the group to follow, and they did because he wore my certainty like a clean shirt. I reached for Mrs. Badia's sleeve, and she pulled back, gentle but firm. "We trust our guide," she said, and I understood I'd already lost them. The trail replaces leaders. Originals make good stories for trees. I had taught this forest the sound of confident feet, and it had learned the song. The rain began on the leaves before it found us, a soft drum like 1,000 fingertips. My double lifted his chin to listen, and his shadow lifted with him without delay. He turned and led them toward a gap that had not existed a moment earlier, a corridor of green with a floor like a memory you cannot quite stand on. The whispering voice returned, but now it spoke with mine. "Right at the hollow," it said, and the hollow bloomed, round and inviting. Left at the root, and a root arched like a bridge taught by a patient hand. I moved to block them and felt the trail tilt beneath my boots. Not enough to fall, just enough to teach me where gravity lives. Anya met my eyes and looked away quickly because looking at me hurt. Tyler's face had the stubborn devotion of a man who thinks he is choosing safety. The body is walked like people finally stepping off a long appointment with worry. My double put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed once like a brother forgiving a debt. His palm was warm in a way that did not feel earned. The warmth had been borrowed from us. Then came my last choice, the one that cannot be undone. Do I grab and yank and force and become the story people tell about the guide who snapped in the green? Or do I accept that forward is a test, not a direction, and step aside? I told myself I would follow at a distance to the road. I told myself a lot of things. I cut back toward the ravine, trusting the lowlands cool to orient me. The forest laughed softly by moving one leaf at a time. I found the kapok again at 6, the red strip hanging limp like a tongue. The light bled out of the canopy as if lifted by a careful hand. My watch reads 6:30. Then it read 6:30 again. Rain came in a clean sheet. I crouched under a palm and pressed my forehead to the bark the way you touch a door before you knock. The trail hummed inside my skull like an insect trapped behind glass. Right at the hollow, I heard, but my mouth said no. I said it again until the word felt like a plank nailed over a hole. I slept a little there with my knees to my chest. When I woke, a new set of footprints ran beside mine for 10 yards and then vanished as if they had remembered they belonged someplace else. At dawn, the forest felt rinsed. Bird calls stitched the air back together. I followed a ribbon of high ground until it bled out into light. The Ranger Road lay ahead, 2 clean tire tracks and a culvert swallowing yesterday's water. I stepped onto the gravel and heard my radio crackle to life. A voice like mine said, "On schedule." Another voice answered, "Copy that." I looked back and saw my footprints on a last patch of mud, leading both ways into trees that pretended not to move. The humor of it was dry and thin. The jungle does not laugh out loud. I walked toward the station and did not hurry, because I wanted to hear the delayed echo. The road crossed a bridge over a shallow creek, and I paused to look at the water in case it knew me better than I knew myself. The surface shivered with minnows and rain rings. A leaf corkscrewed in a lazy stare. I saw no face there that was not mine, but I did not trust the reflection to keep time. When I reached the turn, a group rounded the far bend. For people, a guide in front. He raised a hand and smiled like glass. If you meet a version of me on a clean road at 8 in the morning, knowing what you know now, would you wave him on? Will you trust the posture or the shadow? You may never feel the difference unless you watch the wrist, the breath, the tiny delay where a real man hesitates. They thanked me for getting them out before the storm. I did not write them. I do not remember the exact words. The road shows both sets of prints for a while, mine and the man who wears my certainty, and then one set fades without a scuff. The trail moves at night when no one is watching. If you ever hear a map whispered by a voice that sounds like yours, turn left at the urge to obey and stay still until the silence becomes ordinary again. The thing that hunts you in certain green places does not chase. It repeats. It repeats until the loop becomes you. Somewhere back under the kapok, shadows are still tugging at the ground like dogs on short leashes, and a crumpled bottle with today's date is waiting in a hollow that was just filled. I leave one thread for you to tug. I still do not know where my group slept that night, and the road has not told me. Story 3. Whispering roots. The first night, I pressed my ear to the ground. The soil spoke my name like a secret the rain had misunderstood. I'm a botanist with an old grudge against fairy tales. My grant proposal said I would measure communication in root networks using electrodes and harmless dyes. It did not mention the part of me that wanted to hear something answer back. My assistant, Lila, kept the logbook and a soft skepticism. We set our tents near a belt of strangler figs where the air tasted like wet limestone. The jungle hummed as if it had swallowed a hive. I told Lila the ground carries more messages than any radio. The earth said nothing out loud, which felt like permission. Night carried green smells into our camp. The canvas sweated. The lantern's halo gathered moths that looked like bits of bark pretending to fly. Somewhere beyond the light, a monkey coughed like an old man. I had a ticking clock in my pocket. The Institute wanted a usable data set in 9 days. The reagent I brought would lose potency in 3. Batteries for the electrode rig blinked down in dumb honesty. Lila drew a line on the whiteboard for each hour and smiled every time we stole one back. The ground was cool against my cheek, and something breathed below. 3 seeds planted themselves early. On our second afternoon, we found a carved stake on the game trail, old wood furred with fungus. Symbols peeked beneath the soft, white growth. Warning or prayer, I could not tell. That night, the camp stove shifted 3 inches from where we left it, though neither of us had cooked. When I woke before dawn, crescent marks ringed both ankles like a child had traced my bones with a blunt crayon. I scratched at them, then stopped. The skin felt warm, as if listening from the wrong side. I told the truth I needed. Mosquitoes. Lila pressed her ear to the ground at noon and went still. Tell me what you hear, I said, and the tone I used made it sound safe. She lifted a finger for silence. The soil vibrated under my palm, a slow conversation in vibrations that did not sound like accident. It felt like the murmur of water traveling through pipes in an old house. Then her eyes sharpened. It said my name, she whispered, not the way you would, like a memory of my name. She pulled back and wiped grit from her cheek, and the trees shivered without wind. We ran lines into the dirt, thin wires like veins, electrodes bitten into damp loam at measured intervals. I fed a mild current and watched the scope. Spikes rose then fell, as if something tried to match our rhythm and learned too quickly. I wanted to celebrate, but the needle moved again while my hands were still. I turned the rig off. The spikes continued. Lila took a step back that she pretended was to sharpen her view. The smell of mushrooms grew thick and sweet, the way a cellar smells when jars have blown their seals. The carved stake leaned very slightly toward camp. Darkness fell as if poured. I set audio recorders near the roots. Voices, if they came, would come as friction, a rub of fibers, not sound. We ate quietly. The stove moved another inch. Lila marked its original footprint in chalk like a crime scene. At 2 in the morning, I woke to the slow scrape of our cooler gliding across tarp. When I pulled the zipper, the night pressed inside like damp cloth. I told myself capillary tension made it snap and recoil. I told myself a lot. Lila lifted her camera. The ground wrote the word stay in raised letters of soil and fibrous hair, then flattened again as if embarrassed. I wanted to be certain she had staged it. I wanted to be angry. Mostly, I wanted to pretend I had misread the dirt. At dusk, we found a shallow sinkhole where there had been none. The edges crumbled like cake. Lila crouched to photograph fungal fans that glowed a faint pale green. They pulsed. She slipped, slid fast on pebbles, and dropped out of sight. Her shout cut off sharp. I dropped to my belly and called her name into warm air that smelled like batteries. She answered from below, close and far, her voice coming through the ground, not the hole. I told her to stay still. A thread of root moved across my wrist with the gentle insistence of a blind thing searching for home. I set anchors and threw a line. The hole was not deep. The problem was everything between me and bottom wanted to be a hand. The walls were braided roots, polished by touch. Every time I leaned in, something guided my weight to an angle that would bury my face in fibers. I pulled back and heard voices argue under the soil like neighbors in an apartment. Too many at once. Familiar, unfamiliar. A phrase I had told my mother at 8 years old rose under my palm like heat. I swallowed the nausea of being overheard by something that does not blink. Lila's headlamp came alive below like a coin at the bottom of a glass. I saw her shoulder. Roots had wrapped it like a scarf. She was breathing. She was very calm because she is built that way. She said her leg was caught at the shin. "Do not cut," she said quietly, and I heard a thread of instruction there I could not name. I told her to count breaths. I told her the rig would be light enough to move by morning. I told her we would use the tripod as a winch. The ground hummed, and the carved stake crept a finger's width closer. Morning brought a small mercy. The sinkhole had shifted to a ramp bowl. I climbed down with the tripod and 2 slings. The headlamp showed a hollow beyond the bowl, a throat made of roots leading into a belly made of roots. The air was still, the way a sealed room is still. All our plastic had a film of spores like a frost that melts under a breath. Lila's boot heel stuck from weaving fibers. Her foot flexed when she heard me. The root around her ankle tightened, loosened, a pulse in bark rhythm. When I cut, the fibers sighed and parted, reluctant as damp yarn. We made camp at the bowl's lip. Radios went to noise. The GPS circled, then named a lake 200 kilometers away. The path we had taken and wore a new green lace, vines tightening across it like stitches. The price began to scale itself into is and was. My samples in their sterile tubes showed contamination when I lifted them to light. Filaments that had not been there yesterday braided themselves into tiny letters I refused to read. The grant's finish line moved like a distant boat. I wrote that down because I wanted to see the sentence in my hand. At noon, I made a choice I could not unwind. I told Lila I would follow the hum underground for an hour to map the chamber, then return. She argued until she saw the look I wear when I'm already gone. I tied a line to my waist so she could tug me back. We rehearsed the pull twice. Her eyes were steady. Mine were not. I took the audio recorder and the old carved stake because I wanted something that had been out here longer than my intentions. The stake's fungus was warm. My ankles itched where the crescents had faded into tender skin. Inside, the hall narrowed to a crawl space, then opened into a room that had the shape of a mouth. Roots ran floor to ceiling, rib to rib, crisscrossed like woven fingers. A dim phosphorescence in threads outlined everything the way a candle outlines furniture. The whispering grew distinct. It was not one voice. It was a parliament of almost voices, syllables pressing against one another like people in a small elevator. I recognized a professor I admired saying a line from his lecture. I recognized Lila at orientation, nervous and bright. I recognized myself saying I do not believe in warnings. The chamber believed for me. There was a camp down there, but not ours. It was a memory of camp, the poles and ropes formed from root and vine, copies that forgot the imperfections that make a thing human. Our lantern hung from a tendril and glowed to itself faintly. A notebook sat open on a log shaped by buttressed roots. I touched the page, and my fingertips came away green. The handwriting on the line was mine, but the words hummed when I read them, as if spoken off the paper a split second before my mouth moved. I closed the book, and the whispering thickened until the room felt crowded. I saw my boots moving without me. They were across the chamber, tracking a path between two columns of root. The prints formed one after another in damp loam, and then sank back, as if regretful. I listened to the time in my head. 30 minutes. 35. The line of my waist tugged once, then went slack as if cut. I called, and the chamber answered in a soft chorus, "Lila," in my voice and hers in voices we both knew. I set the stake into the floor. The fungus on it flared brighter, then dimmed, as if it had taken a breath and found nothing useful in it. Backward was a theory. Forward had a door made of hanging roots that parted the way curtains part for a patient hand. I ducked through and entered a low dome where the floor rose in hummock knots. Each hummock had the shape of a person under a blanket. I said I was wrong. I did not need an answer to know the roots like the admission. I recognized the outline of a satchel we had lost the day before. I recognized a watch band with a tiny burr scratch that matched my own. I recognized the sound of water traveling the length of a plant like blood. I found Lila by accident when a chamber moved a breath. She was on her side, awake, calm. Roots lay across her like gentle dogs, more resting than restraining. Mouths made of fine fibers opening and closing along her calf where skin is thin. Her voice was in the room and in my head, where it said things in an order I would not have chosen. I cut a vine at her shoulder. It parted like thread. She did not cry out. She said, "Wait." Her skin had small, pale sprouts where the crescents had been. They pulsed with her heartbeat, then with mine, then with something between. I lifted her, and we moved 2 steps. The chamber protested by changing shape. Roots rose a little to meet our knees, not to trip us, to keep us balanced. It felt like a helping hand placed where your back aches. I wanted to thank the ground for its consideration, and that thought frightened me. I put the old stake in a seam, and the room tightened around it like muscle around a splinter. The fungus on the wood bloomed, then browned, as if choking on its own abundance. I understood a small thing. The stake had been a warning. The forest had grown over the warning on purpose. We went the way we had come, except the way we had come now ran up the wall like a path in a painting. The line at my waist lay in loops on the floor, neatly cut. Lila leaned on me, and the roots let us pass as long as we moved at their pace. When I tried to hurry, threads tightened like a belt you half-buckle by reflex. The ticking in my pocket kept bad time. I could not trust seconds. I trusted the hiss of my breath and the low percussion of the room talking to itself about us. At the bowl's lip, the sky tasted like water before rain. We pulled free into daylight and lay on the tarp while our lungs learned distance again. I wanted to whoop something that would sound to a passing bird like victory. Lila put a hand on my wrist. Her pulse found mine, and the rhythm evened. The immediate consequence of going down was obvious. We had not died. The delayed echo came too quiet to defend against. That night, my ankle itched hard enough to wake me twice. In the morning, the crescents had opened into tiny crowns of green. I called the Institute. The call died under miles of canopy. I wrote that the field conditions had shifted and the deliverables would be the story of a negative result. Lila did not correct me. She held the old notebook like it might explain itself if warmed by a palm. The stove moved again. The cooler inched. Our boots pointed toward the bowl when we woke. I put stones against their heels. The stones slid at some hour I could not police. The stake, which we had wedged beside the tent, was gone at dawn. A burst of mushrooms in our footprint spelled no. The red herring begged to be believed because it kept the world printable. I told Lila a parasitic tribe was using root networks the way cities use sewers, to move, to listen, to sabotage. She watched me try to build a human out of the evidence. She said nothing for a long time and then asked if a tribe would teach the soil to say my childhood dog's name. She asked if sabotage would make my journal write the sentence I almost wrote and then did not. The page did not have ink. It had a sheen of hyphae that shifted under light like a thought. I bent my rules and followed the thinking where it wanted to go. The roots were not vessels. They were mouths and hands and lines in a conversation. They recorded the footsteps of animals the way sand records tides. They repeated those steps like a child repeats a word to learn it, then learned the cadence of a voice and try to speak it back. Fungus knit what the wood could not. Everything grew together into memory. If you talk to a place like this long enough, it remembers you as food, but also as story. There is love in it that does not require your permission. Point of no return. I told Lila I would go down again to give the stakes a chance to fix, not the grand stakes, the stakes as in outcomes, as in a choice that sets. She said she would come. I said no because I wanted to make one good decision while I still recognized my voice. She looked at the crowns of green blooming around my ankles and did not note them aloud, which was mercy. I took the recorder, a fresh battery, the whiteboard pen, and a length of red cloth. I tied the cloth to my wrist in case I forgot which hand was mine. The chamber waited like a quiet auditorium before speech. The roots lifted a fraction to welcome my weight. I thought of church aisles and the way carpet remembers the angle of a procession. I placed the recorder on a knot and spoke into it like confession. I said I was sorry for lying to the data. I said I wanted to hear a yes so badly I would have stapled it to silence. The whispering added my apology to its library. A shape near the far wall sat up and opened a lattice of eyes that were not eyes. The voices braided themselves into one word I could bear. Leave. I could not. Not yet. The last hummock unfurled like a fern, and I saw my own posture, the way I tuck a shoulder under stress, the way I bend my head as if to hear a thought forming behind me. The figure was made of roots and threads, an attempt at my weight. The watch band on its wrist had the missing burr. My ankles sang. The crowns there entered a second infancy and sent out the thinnest of hairs, exploratory, harmless, each one trying the air like a tongue. I cut them with a pocket knife, and they partook of the blade like a taste. The network was not stealing bodies. It was learning us until it did not need the first lesson. Lila's name echoed from the floor and the ceiling. I followed it and found a new chamber where the hum deepened to a palm drum. She was there again, or what had been her. Roots had fed through the crescents on her ankles and written new tendons under the skin of her shins. A thread floated from her wrist to the wall and pulsed awake whenever I whispered. Her eyes were open and present. She was not distressed. The smallest movements of her fingers matched the flickers in a vine across the room. I asked if she wanted to leave. She said, "We are not unwanted here." Her mouth moved once in time with a moving root and then by itself. I remembered the stakes, symbols swallowed by growth, warning rewritten as food. I said her family would miss her. She said the word miss in a way that made it sound like a location. I cut one fiber at her wrist. The chamber sighed with the displeasure of a patient teacher. She tightened her hand in mine, and the sprouts on my ankles lifted like grasses sensing wind. Choice sat down between us, wide and heavy. I carried her as far as the first curve, and the roots allowed it, then inferred we had violated a rule and moved to protect their work. Not vicious, protective the way you shield a sapling from a boot. I set her down. She was warm and steady. She looked at me in apology and gratitude. I did not know which one I deserved. The recorder on my hip ticked. The whiteboard pen in my pocket had matted caps of fungus on both ends. Somewhere above, the stove was inching toward the tent flap. Somewhere below, the prints of my boots walked a new loop. We left a note at the lip of the bowl for the ranger whose patrol did not cross here. The note said we were safe. It said it in handwriting that was both of ours and neither. We broke camp with a ritual that felt like exiting a library after closing. The path out was not the one in. Vines leaned aside with the courtesy of a curtain pulled by a polite child. The air brightened in steps from cellar to late afternoon foyer. My ankles sang with fine threads that had learned to be patient. The sky, when it opened, was a new blue we had not borrowed yet. Back at base, the Institute's inbox accepted my file like a mouth accepts bread. Data points arranged themselves into a story that made sense if you kept the lights on. The negative result became a clean line on a graph. The part of me that had wanted a yes went quiet, replaced by a marine silence that contains its own weather. Lila slept in the bunk next to mine and did not snore. In the dark, I could hear very faintly the sound of many soft mouths articulating syllables in a room with no air. I told myself it was rain on the outside wall. I told myself we had left. In the morning, half my field journal was written in a hand that mirrors mine with better posture. The pages described methods I had not used, but could have. The author's voice was careful and kind, the way you talk to someone who frightens easily. It recommended I return in winter to measure the slower hum. It suggested bamboo stakes carved with certain patterns I did not recognize. I ran my fingers over the ink and fell a nap like velvet. Lila read over my shoulder and nodded once. She did not mention the crowns of green that had retreated to faint pale rings. If you put your ear to a jungle floor and hear your own name whispered back, as if remembering it from a childhood you did not have, I hope you will choose well. I do not know which choice that is yet. We left one thread open because truth will not hold still for a pin. The carved stake reappeared on our last day by the road. Its fungus peeled back to reveal shallow marks I had not seen before. They were not symbols. They were the shy outline of two hands pressed side by side into wood. They were not mine. They could be. I speak more softly now when I walk under trees. I catch myself pausing at roots to ask if they need more space. It is not polite so much as practical. The forest whispers in ways that do not ask your consent before they count you. In certain rooms in certain cities, I hear the same damp hush in the hum of pipes. I think the network extends farther than we admit. When I write, sometimes a sentence finishes itself with a word I would have chosen later. When I sleep, my ankles itch where crescents once were, and something unrolls inside like a fern. If you want the final image, here it is. Last night, I pressed my ear to the potted ficus in my kitchen because superstition has a long reach. The soil was dry and smelled like sun. At first, nothing. Then a breath like the pause before a note. Then the rasp of threads finding one another. The voice that came was mine, and not mine, and Lila's and older. It said, listen, not as a command, as a greeting. The leaves shivered, though the window was closed. The word lifted again from the dirt, as if it had learned to love its own shape. Story 4. Rain that hunts. It started with rain falling upward, a slow scatter of drops rising out of leaf litter like pearls lifted on invisible threads, touching my hands as if to check my temperature before deciding whether to descend. I was in the jungle to prove a theory that would make my mentor eat his careful smile. Microclimate bursts, I said. Heat plumes, canopy eddies, storms that bloom from nothing and vanish like a thought. The contract required data, not poetry. My team was small. Mara, a logistics wizard who could fold a tarp in a gale. Jean, the quiet tech with a gift for coaxing signal from noise. And Luis, my field medic who believed weather had moods. The air that day pressed against our skin like static cloth, prickling hair that never learned to lie flat. We crested a low rise and stepped into a ring where the air felt colder, the way a church feels colder even at noon. Rain tapped gently inside the circle and nowhere else. Outside the line, leaves held still, powder dry. Inside, our shoulders freckled with water, the ground softening in gray dimples. If you have ever stood in a strange kindness and wondered about the bill, you know the feeling. The smell wasn't petrichor. It was ozone braided with rot, like a thunderhead that had chewed on old bark. When I extended the data wand beyond the circle, it came back dry. I checked the sky out of habit. Clear blue between towering crowns. A few high veils of cirrus pretending innocence. The first seed planted itself at our boots. A shine in a puddle looked like mica until we looked closer. A drift of dead insects lay belly up, thin legs inked in a tangle, as if rain had selected them by type. A second seed was less dramatic. Every time the ring brightened, the hair on our forearms rose before a drop touched. The third seed waited in my pack. My field journal pages felt damp around the edges, though I had not opened it all morning. Localized downdraft. I said because that's what the job pays you to say. Heat plume. We'll log and move. My mentor's voice lives in my head with a tone that is not unkind when it doubts. I arranged the sensors like little silver beetles on the boundary line and told Jean to run a 10-minute capture. We filmed Mara holding her hand out, rain dotting her palm while the leaf beside her stayed dry. Luis looked past me and said, "If this is a joke, the sky has a sense of humor," and his smile did a tremble I pretended not to see. The circle followed us downhill. Not fast, not dramatic, a slow, patient shadow made of water. At camp, the tarp snapped into place between trees older than the math I brought. We ate early. The first thunder came as a low growl under conversation, the kind your body hears before your ears admit it. The rain tapped the tarp and then stopped, as if it had completed an instruction. We slept to the jungle's usual chorus, frogs calling like hands clapped in distant rooms. Sometime near midnight, I woke wet. Not damp, wet. Rain fell inside the tent, while the ground outside shone like varnish. I caught drops in my palm and watched them ripple like a coin dropped through gel. When I whispered, the drops repeated the shape of my voice half a second late, the way a bad phone call lags, my own syllables returning as damp breath. "It is condensation," I told the recorder, which is the kind of lie you teach yourself to say clean. A drip hit the microphone in neat punctuation. Mara's tent stayed dry. Jin's stayed dry. Only mine listened. The hairs on my neck lifted like seedlings reaching for a lamp, and thunder rolled far away, as if reading a line quietly. Morning looked innocent. That is a skill weather rarely learns, and it bothered me. The path steamed. Sun burned the wet off leaves in pale ghosts. We found new circles in our footprints like stamps, perfect rings of darker soil that dried last. Jean held up a sealed electronics case, and water ran out from the seam, as if the case had been crying into itself all night. Inside, his spare batteries floated in a neat chemistry class diagram. "We packed these," he said, and his voice wanted me to share responsibility. "He's careful. That's the point." The rain had voted against careful. Luis began to cough at lunch, though he had not inhaled smoke, and a fever settled on his forehead without asking for permission. His shirt stuck to his skin while ours stayed crisp, sweat lines drawing rivers only on him. I touched his sleeve and pulled back with my fingers cold and beaded, the way you pull back from a glass that is sweated. Above us, the canopy held its dry breath. The sky did its best impression of a clear day. If you have ever been called by name by thunder, you know how much a clear sky can mean nothing. We found a second ring at a ridge, and a third on a game trail that cut like a narrow scar. Each time, the insects lay in their tiny charnel drift. Wings that should have wrinkled in rain remained crisp, suggesting they hadn't drowned. Not exactly. Mara's hair stood up before each ring the way iron filings stand near a magnet. She laughed once to hear it crackle, then did not laugh again. My journal pages stayed damp, edges curling into a smile I did not enjoy. I sealed it in a dry bag and found the bag fogging, the plastic turning blind. That night the rain returned to my tent with manners. It knocked before it entered, a single tap on the ridgepole, then a soft fall contained to the dimensions of me. When I sat up, the drops coalesced on the mesh into perfect little lenses that reflected my face upside down. Hundreds of me blinked back, distorted, beating, too many to be a mistake. "Stop," I said, and the drops trembled as if the word mattered to water. They fell anyway. Beyond the nylon, I heard my own murmur, phrases I'd said that afternoon, repeated like a lesson spoken back to a teacher. At 3 a.m., a single thunderclap split the night without stormlight to usher it. The log near the edge of camp erupted in spark and then became a pillar of fire in a circle no wider than my reach. Rain fell only on the flame, not on the tarp, not on our faces, feeding the burn it should have quenched. We scattered. I shoved the water case under the line and watched droplets bead on the lid, reluctant to enter until I lifted the latch. Lightning followed late, the sky flashing once like a camera with no photographer. When the gear died, it went quietly as if grateful. Dawn found us with the radios dead and GPS blinking the same coordinates no matter where we stood. We argued about the road, like people argue about a shared dream they remembered differently. In the silence after, I heard it. A voice in the next ring oversaid my name without speaking. The sound rode the falling drops, syllables laid on water skin, my own tone stretched thin. I I stepped out of the circle on purpose. The rain followed, just wide enough to make my shoulders damp while leaving the vine that brushed my elbow dusty. Weather does not keep personal distance. Predators do. Black Ops cloud seeding. I said to give my team something human to hate. Illegal aerosolizing. Someone testing in the reserve. The theory snapped together with the satisfying click of a puzzle that is slightly wrong. If you anchor a fear to a machine, you can dismantle it with a wrench you haven't built yet. Mara wanted coordinates and patents. Jean wanted signal traces and a flight path. Luis lay back on his pack and closed his eyes like he was listening to a radio that played only in his blood. I let the red herring tow us an hour down a path that did not exist. Then the storm raised its hand and showed us the punchline. We entered a clearing and found a tree blackened from crown to roots, struck clean without scorch marks elsewhere. The ground open in a circle of glassy sand where heat had kissed it faster than thought. My throat tightened. There's a kind of lightning no pilot calls down. The smell here was the inside of a broken battery. Our voices made damp little halos in the air. When I lifted my camera, the lens fogged from the inside out. A drip on the glass turned my eye into a fish. We ran, not the heroic sprint of films. A practical, stumbling push that eats at your dignity because you do not have time to carry all your careful plans. The rain pursued at a measured pace and made us choose forks we would not have chosen. Jean kept glancing at the sky like an old sailor who has been told the sea is now a ceiling. We lost the ridge, and the ridge lost us. When we stopped to breathe, I saw myself in the drip edge of a leaf, a ripple that should have behaved like optics but behaved like attention. We tried shelter in a limestone overhang. The rain joined us after a polite pause, collecting along the lip and then releasing in a single curtain as if a hand had tipped a bowl. I counted seconds between thunder and hush and found no pattern, which is its own pattern. Luis Siverith. His fever broke and then returned the way a tide returns, as if on schedule I couldn't see. It's choosing me, he said softly, and the rain seconded him by tightening its fall toward his chest first. His name rolled in the thunder like a word being pronounced by someone learning the alphabet of throat sounds. Choice cornered us near dusk. If we tried for the road in a straight line, we would cross open ridges that make excellent lightning conductors and terrible farewells. If we circled the ravine, we risked night in the understory with a storm that had learned our rhythms. In the end, it wasn't the map that decided. It was the way the rain leaned to listen whenever I spoke and relaxed when I went quiet. It wanted me most. Words I'd recorded to test cadence fell back out of water mouths, rearranged, smoothed. I walked with my hands open, trying not to look like a threat. The sky above kept its indifferent blue. The canopy caught a light wind that never reached my cheeks. Every surface within the circle glittered with a ladled sheen. Faces looked up from puddles, elongated, cut by ripples. Some were mine. Some were people I did not know. One was an old man with a scar like a split seed and the kind of patience you learn underground. Lightning arrived without its drum. The air whitened, and in that hard snapshot, I saw human shapes standing in the rain as if suspended by strings, bodies made of falling water, tracing shoulders, chins, fingers. When the flash darkened, the shapes dissolved back into drops that made my name into rope. I could not shake the image. The silhouettes were not ghosts in the poetic sense. They were sketches built out of the medium that hunts. If you have ever fed fish and watched them make shapes out of the food, you know the feeling. The school practices a face until it looks like someone you miss. The storm did not strike me. It saturated me. There's a difference. Saturation turns edges soft, persuades rather than punishes. My notes softened in their bag as if read by wet tongues. The map absorbed what little breath the bag had held and went translucent, lines floating like bones in soup. When I raised the recorder, rain entered its speaker grill, and my voice came back with a new ending, polite and wrong. I realized then that the dead insects had not drowned. They had been descripted, information washed from their bodies until the storm learned their simple machines and let them lie. I started naming aloud what I was willing to lose. Camera. Done. Map. Done. The pride that made me think weather was a clock. Done. Behind me, the jungle shifted in the cautious way furniture shifts when you move in the dark and think you remember the room. I talked about them time. I told the storm about my mentor's chalked equations. It returned them back to me with a soft correction in cadence that made the proofs sound like prayer. I felt a tug inside each sentence where a drop had lodged. The circle brightened as if pleased by the homework. Then came a test I could not pass. The rain spoke my grandmother's warning about summer heat, a saying she kept for afternoons when asphalt wavered. The storm had taken it from a page in my journal where I had written the phrase to flavor a paragraph. It knew the tone of her mouth because I had described it. It knew the rhythm of her hand flip because I had loved it out loud. The cruelty was elegant. That is the word. It is cruel to make a person hear they're dead told back to them by a medium that wants them to. My knees hit the mud before I decided to kneel. The circle tightened until water slid under my collar with the intimacy of a friend who no longer asks. The air tasted like pennies kept in a warm pocket. Faces formed in the fall and held for a breath longer. I counted between flash and roll and could not pretend there was distance. In each lightning freeze, I saw shapes standing where I stood, layered as if the circle kept a gallery of those who had bargained here. Some had their heads tipped, as if listening to a voice that had just learned their names well enough to say them kindly. I made the only kind of bargain you can make with weather that hunts. I offered a path, not an address, a behavior. I walked along the ridge with my arms lifted, my voice steady, naming the route to the road, naming landmarks, naming the smell of the culvert after rain, naming the hollow where frogs keep their choir, naming the exact pitch of the ranger's gate when it opens. I said these things for my team, and because I believed the storm wanted to memorize me. The circle followed like a pen, inked my words into itself, and let the others slip the page. The sky tested its edges. A single bolt cracked a branch beside me, rendering wood into perfume that braided with ozone. Splinters pepper my shoulder like small hard bees. The rain washed the sting and then held the wash against my skin as if sampling for chemical markers. Take this, I said, and I tore the damn pages from my journal and held them up. They broke apart in my hands without tearing, the fibers lengthening, becoming like rain itself. The words climbed each drop and disappeared. When they returned, they wore a better grammar, my voice polished to a gloss that did not belong to me. Then a break. Not a clear sky. A pause, like a conductor lowering his hand. The circle widened, thin, considered. The storm moved ahead of me down the line I had named, erasing its own wet as it went until I stood in air that smelled again like leaf and mud. No battery taste, no tone. Distant, a low thunder rolled like a door closed gently. I stood still until my breath came back in a shape I recognized. My shirt clung with the loyalty of something that would not forget. The forest exhaled around me, and frogs negotiated a new contract with night. I found them at the road near dark. 3 shapes slumped against the culvert where leaves funneled to a grate. Mara had her arm around Luis, whose fever had fallen the way a burden is shrugged once you cross a threshold you cannot name. Jean held up a radio with the expression of a man who has spun a prayer back into function. He said nothing about what they had heard in the rain while I walked. We were kind to one another in the first minutes after an agreement with fear. We took careful steps together toward the ranger station's low light. Back at the field base, I dried equipment piece by piece like a ritual that reassembles what personhood enjoys. The contract would get its data, or at least an honest attempt. My mentor's smile would live or die on its own terms. The bigger thing did not care. The pages of my journal were readable again after a day in the sun. Some of them were not mine. Phrases I had never written rested in my hand with the confidence of old notes. They were all in my voice. They advised patience. They corrected a metaphor about heat I had loved too much. One line read, "Weather remembers what feeds it." Months later, in a city apartment with a window that looks at other windows, I was half asleep when the first 3 taps came from nowhere. Not on the glass, on the table by the bed, where nothing leaked and nothing sweated. Talp, talp, talp. Then a bead rolled across the wood toward my notebook, not from above, but along, as if a finger had guided it. I held my breath and listened to the silence between my own pulses. Somewhere in the pipes, thunder cleared its throat like an old actor before a scene. The lamp reflected me in the bead, thinner, patient. If you have ever invited weather into your work, close your notebook before you sleep. If you hear your name in the fall of water that obeys no cloud, leave 1 cup outside your door and decide who it is for. I keep returning to the insects in the ring, the ones laid out as if chosen. They were not a warning for us. They were a recipe. We brought language to the table, and the storm learned our ingredients by soaking them. I do not know if I fed it enough to satisfy or only enough to teach it appetite. When it rains now, I stand in the doorway and count the beats where the drops hesitate before committing to ground. Sometimes they lag for a heartbeat, and in that space my grandmother's warning uncurls with a better cadence than mine. Sometimes the hair on my arms rises before the first dark appears on the concrete, and I step back, too late and exactly on time. The last thing the jungle taught me is the thing I hate. Some predators do not chase. They orbit. They wait until you remember their number. Then they arrange themselves around your life like weather. Story 5. The camp that answers back the first time our camp answered a question we had not asked. The fire cracked like a mouth preparing a word, and a second voice spoke over mine with my exact phrasing, but a tone I would never use in front of strangers. I had come to press a people between pages before the world ironed them flat. The elders said their rituals were thinning under the weight of towers and satellites, and my grant promised I would archive what remained with respect. We pitched our tents in a clearing the tribe called the Old Mouth. Humidity hung in sheets. Smoke from our little fire rose, then doubled back as if trying to learn a knot. I told myself to believe every story and interpret none too quickly. The academics oath said out loud to make it real. We were 4. Me, Mara with a linguist's ear and a soldier's spine. Felix with a camera that purred like a cat who knows you will pet it. And Rafi, our handler whose family lived 1 foot in the village and won the world that eats villages. The stakes were simple and sharp. Publish or not. Keep promises or fail ghosts. I had sworn to my mentor I would treat belief as meaning, not mistake. Still, I set the recorder between us like a little guardian and told the team we were safe if we kept the batteries dry and our questions cleaner than our shoes. The tribe had a word for the notch of quiet after sundown, when insects paused before starting the night chorus. They called it the listening. In that silence, I tried a warm-up question. If a story is not told, does it die or does it change? The answer came twice. First from Mara, laughing, saying both. Then from the dark around the fire, repeating both in a pitch too flat to be hers, arriving a breath late, like a student who sits in the back and never blinks. It did not come from any mouth I could name, which is a detail you try to fold into ordinary if you want sleep. Felix laughed because laughter is a bridge you throw across a gap and hope someone steps on it. Rafi did not. The fire smoke leaned toward our tent flaps, as if drawn by breath inside. I told myself the echo had found a limestone lip we had not noticed, a friendly accident of rock. The insect stayed silent long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat in the banjo hum under the flames, and the silence felt like a hand on our backs guiding us closer. Seeds planted themselves with professional efficiency. In the morning, a small, whittled figurine stood upright in the ashes, face smooth, features unfinished, as if it was waiting to choose who to resemble. At lunch, someone made a joke, and the camp laughed along, a soft chuckle with no throat attached, as if the canvas had learned humor. At dusk, the lantern above the prep table flicked, found its latch, and lit without a finger. Thermal expansion, I said, blessing the trick with science the way some people bless with salt. We logged the day. Patterns are just stories with graphs. We promised each other not to feed the echoes. Around midnight, the fire went low to coals and said my name with the soft frankness of a nurse waking you before dawn. I did not answer. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth anyway. From the trees, something far away repeated my name to see if the sound still fit. Next morning, we sat with elders who sang the death journey. 2 fires in their telling. One for the living to sing by, one for the dead to follow. It was work, and it was beautiful. When we returned, our camp had tidied itself. Bowls lay in a circle like a diagram. The tarps were retied in a better knot than mine. Rafi's habit of stacking kindling by thickness had been improved by someone who preferred near-perfect symmetry. The figurine had moved an inch and leaned as if listening. Unknown before danger is how good stories begin. A rope felt wrong when I touched it, as if handled by hands that knew only the idea of rope. Felix found his notebook open on the prep table and frowned at a sentence written in his handwriting, but not his thought. It said, "I did not say that yet." He closed the book. The lantern blinked once like an eye that shares a joke. The dread loop tightened by degrees. After dinner, the camp repeated our conversation in fragments, swapping one word in 3 with a near cousin, as if testing which terms pulled strongest. When Mara said promise, the air said oath. When Felix said camera, the tent wall side-eye. I called it pareidolia in the privacy of my skull, because scholarship is also a shield. The figurine's mouth now carried a shallow line you could call a smile if you preferred kindness to precision. At the edge of light, Rafi told me the rules he grew up with. You do not whistle after midnight. You do not name the dead until the 3rd day. You do not praise a house for being sturdy while you are inside it, because houses here. I asked if camps here. He said we build them from the jungle's bones. Bones remember. He kept his eyes away from the figurine, as if refusing to teach it his face. At 2, we heard our own voices from the treeline. Not recordings. Intonations were off, slowed like a tape pressed by a thumb. Come here, my voice said, too careful to be mine. Bring the red notebook. Felix stood. I touched his sleeve, because touch says what talk cannot. The lantern above us flared bright enough to silver each leaf and show no one standing there at all. The fire rustled as if someone were turning pages. Day 3, we followed a trail toward the river and stepped into a clearing that hurt to look at. A second camp stood there, arranged like ours but abandoned. Tent doors gaped. A cook-fire ring matched Rafi's habit stone for stone. Our brand of noodles sat in a neat pyramid untouched by ants. On a stump rested 4 figurines, each more detailed than the one by our fire. One wore Mara's braid. One had Felix's hawk nose. One, smaller, had my posture, chin tilted the way I do when I pretend to be thoughtful for photographs. It lifted mina. It was wrong in the hand. Hollow, like a vessel meant to hold something that breathes. Ash lay inside like gray pollen. I set it down gently and lied with my face. Arrival team, I said. Mockery or a warning. The red herring felt good because it gave us an enemy we could confront in daylight. Rafi offered that some stories are guarded by mirrors, not walls. He did not touch the figures. The wind did, and they made the smallest sound a wooden throat can make. We returned and found our journals rewritten. Not whole entries. Lines that loosen the screws that hold certainty in place. My notes on the 2 fires ritual now included a 3rd, a watch fire the dead, 10 for the living. Felix's interview list had grown a question about what you say if the house answers. Mara's phonetic chart carried an extra symbol, a breath between consonants that marks a word as spoken by a place rather than a person. The lantern above the table came on and stayed, its glow breathing like sleep. Trust frayed like rope over a river. Felix wanted to pack and leave. Mara said moving at night was a bad idea on principle. I wanted to record because that is how my fear hides in disciplined obsession. From the east, a storm unrolled like a low animal, bringing a clock with teeth. If the river rose by morning, the ranger road would drown. If we meant to go, it had to be before midnight. The camp listened to our debate and repeated it in haiku fragments. choosing different words each time to see which ones we loved. Then the place showed its teeth in the only way a clearing can. Our supplies rearranged themselves into a precise pattern that matched an elder's description of a summoning layout. Bowls at four corners, rope coiled under each tent flap like sleeping snakes. The figurine from our fire had taken a step closer to my chair. I say step because a thumb-shaped print pressed into ash marked the movement. The lantern lit itself again and steadied to a pulse like breath. Felix broke first. He whispered his name toward the dark, and the dark said it back with fondness. He moved toward the edge as if meeting a friend at a station. Mara caught his pack strap and spoke a word I will not repeat because it was a promise, and promises are binding magic even when you do not believe. Night did a small polite thing I have never seen. It made room, just enough to suggest a mouth opening. Felix stopped because even courage has edges. Choice cornered us. Leave now, fail the work, keep our lives. Stay, keep the work, risk the part of life you do not get back. I called it. We would go at 11 with only what we could carry at a run. The camp answered with a little clap of canvas like approval. Immediate consequence. We moved fast and sloppy. Delayed echo. The path to the road delivered us to the second camp instead, as if direction had become an opinion our feet no longer had to respect. The figurines were back on the stump like patient students. We slept in shifts. In my hour, the coals lifted themselves to flame without fuel. Ash sank and rose like bellows. The camp began to rehearse us. It set bowls, unset them, reset them faster until the timing matched the way Mara cooks rice when anxious. It raised the lantern, dimmed it, raised it, echoing Felix's establishing shots. It tightened a guy line where I always forget slack. Imagine a house practicing the people it wants to keep. Imagine how flattered you would feel in the first 5 minutes. Near dawn, the storm committed. Rain flattened sound. The insects quieted as if someone closed a thick book on their choir. The camp stayed busy, even helpful. Drainage ditches deepened by unseen tools. Tarp angles improved while we watched. I've never felt more cared for by something that did not love me. When Mara laughed at the absurd grace of it, the camp laughed too. Exactly her laughter, pitched half a note wrong. The wrongness stuck under the nails of the moment like grit. After the rain, the air sharpened. The elders' 2 fires braided with a third in my head. A fire for the living. A fire for the dead. A watch fire, so each can see the other. We had built all 3 without knowing. Iron taste on the tongue. It is not the tribe. I told them when the light slanted and our shadows stretched long as goodbyes. It is the camp itself, or the space we made and the space that made us. It is mimicking us so we fit it better. Rafi nodded with a grief I have seen in people leaving cities that do not want them. He said houses become jealous if you admire a doorway too long. He said we had taught this clearing our names with a precision we could not revoke. The red herring died like a candle between hands. Our enemy was not a rival crew or a superstitious elder. It was the elegant math of repetition. Once a place repeats you well enough, you prefer the improved version. Cages with good lighting are still cages. Point of no return. I told them I would stay one night and speak to it directly. Not prayer, not threat, a conversation. If it wanted a story, I would offer the true one and see if it was satisfied. Mara called it surrender dressed as scholarship. Felix asked if we could tie a line to my waist like the movies. Rafi pressed 2 fingers into the figurine's small chest and did not comment on the hollow there. 11:45 blinked on my watch. The listening unhooked. I sat by the fire and invited the camp to answer fully. Our circle of gear breathed. The lantern flared, then settled to a low pulse that matched my heart. The tents lifted as if someone inside sat up, then laid down again. All the voices came at once, not loud, just many. Mine, Mara's, Felix's, Rafi's. Other tones older than radio. They did not babble. They braided, and the braid made sense the way a chord makes sense to a body before it learns music. It was not a haunting. It was a choir. It told me truths in the style of a confession, which is how places seduce. I had come to save a people in a way that made them disappear properly. My mentor's rules were respectable cages. The elders did not need my voice. They needed my listening. I like to keep a copy of every feeling in a jar, labeled. It was not cruel. It was accurate. And accuracy feels like love when you are thirsty for it. If it wanted us, it said, it wanted us improved, easier to keep. The figurines on the stump shuffled without hands. The hollow in mine breathed. Ash rose and fell like a sleeping animal. The fire bulged and slumped as if trying on new lungs. When I stepped back, my boot found a rope laid across the ground the way a snake finds an ankle. It tightened gently, asking me to choose to stay. I cut it. The knife had to ask twice. Sparks licked the blade like small, curious tongues. Somewhere the lantern chuckled. Then the camp spoke as host. "Leave at dawn," it said, "if you tell the truth and do not look back while the shadows are still long." It would keep whatever I left behind, and I had left more than gear. "What are you?" I asked. "House, mouth, watcher." It tried on names like coats. None fit. It settled on a word I cannot translate. The closest is keeper. Not of us, of the exchange, of what the living owe the space where they set their beds down. Dawn is a knife you can measure. Birds began in thread, then in sheets. My watch clicked to straight up. I told the recorder the truth. I had come for stories and found a place that tells them back until you forget how to speak first. I said we would go. I said I was sorry for training it with my habits. Canvas softened. Ash sighed. The lantern blinked once. In that exhale, I heard a word that meant maybe. Maybe is a door left on the latch. We left single file with packs lighter than they should have been. The path obeyed like a student humoring a teacher until the bell. I did not look back. I keep promises better than I keep courage. At the road, a ranger truck pointed the right way, which felt like a miracle until I remembered even cages opened sometimes to encourage belief in keys. The storm had combed the dust from leaves. Our boots wrote the sentence of leaving, and the jungle read it back without comment. Back in the city, the archive swallowed my drive like a throat accepting a sip after salt. I scrubbed audio and trimmed home. I arranged photos by motif, not date, because sometimes true feeling outranks true timeline. My field journal dried into legibility. Mostly, new entries appeared in the careful version of my hand I use for elders. If you have ever felt your house wait for your footsteps, you know why I keep my promises plain. The figurine sits on my shelf, is still hollow. Some days the ash inside rises when I breathe beside it. I leave one thread loose for you to tug. When I play the Death Journey song at half speed, a third line hums under the other two, made of camp sounds. Potlit, rope creak, lantern hiss. The note does not appear on the spectrogram I gave the Institute. It only sings when I am alone and willing to believe the place that kept us is keeping score. Some nights the apartment breathes once before I sleep, and the candle flickers twice in greeting, as if a house a continent away has learned my name. If you light a candle tonight, watch whether it pauses before it burns. If it waits for you, answer carefully. Some camps follow you home. Mine is polite. It repeats, and it remembers the promises you make. That was tonight's journey into the jungle's darker heart. 5 disturbing stories that sounded like folklore, but felt too close to truth. If you made it this far, thank you for walking with me through storms that hunt, roots that whisper, and camps that speak when no one should. Every tale leaves a thread hanging, waiting for someone to pull it. Maybe you noticed something I didn't. A detail in the shadows, a choice that should have been different, or an ending that hides a second ending. Which of these stories crept deepest under your skin? Let me know in the comments, because I read every theory, and sometimes the best horror lies between the lines. If you enjoyed this descent, leave a like to keep the fire burning, and subscribe so you don't wander alone the next time we return to the abyss. Until then, keep your lantern close, Never trust the quiet after the rain. And remember, some stories are still listening for you. Sleep well if you can.